Welcome back. For our second presentation, I'll shut the door in just a moment. I want to first introduce our next presenter, Anna Martinez. Woo! Worked with her advisor, Dr. Alex Barron, on a project called Exploring Latino Role Models, Making Space for New Conversations. And without further ado, I'm going to let you take it over and just expect a loud moment and loud noise in just a moment while I shut the door. And there'll be time for Q&A and a few words from Anna's mentor after the presentation.
Hello, as Dr. Wolf said, my name is Anna Martinez, and today I will be presenting my project on the power of Latina role models. I will highlight some role models and I will discuss my research surrounding what makes a role model. I will also talk about the website that I created and the writing process that went along with this. I want to start by sharing how this project came to be. I think this project is largely the culmination of my experience as a young Latina woman here. I want to start by I want to start with the experience of Latinas learning about other Latinas. I started learning about other Latinas culturally and academically once I got here at St. Edward's. Before this, my knowledge on powerful Latina women, especially those speaking out against their own culture, was limited. I knew of the Latina pop stars, those on TV and those on the radio, but I did not know of the academics, mainly because my parents didn't know them either, so there was no way for them to pass them along to me. In addition, they weren't in popular media, so they weren't easily accessible to me. This was frustrating because I spent so much time looking for a role model who looked like me and who, like me, was in academia. Had I known about these women earlier, like when I was in high school, my journey would have been a lot easier. I wouldn't have felt like the only brown woman trying to speak out against the not so great parts about my culture, and I think I would have believed a little more in my ability to be a writer. I then started thinking about why I idolized certain women. When this year started, my mom and my grandma came down to help me unpack my drawer. There was funny jokes about the little amounts of fabric present, but at one point I pulled out a blazer and my grandma said, "Mira, como Selena." To which I said, "Sí, y me lo pongo como ella, con puro brasier." She laughed and she said that it was good though. She said, "Good, Selena did the same thing." She was told not to wear those outfits, but she didn't care, she wore them anyway. I idolized these women because they embodied something that I wanted to be, and that apparently my mom and grandma also wanted to be. I wanted to be able to hold my ground like Selena and wear whatever I wanted without being deemed less than a man. So I knew I wanted to talk about this issue, about role models and why they are important, and I wanted to provide some sort of solution. I started researching and I learned a little bit more about transcendence. I researched more about why we do make certain women role models, and transcending the border was a really big factor. Okay, so I knew I wanted to talk about role models and I had my research. Then I went back to my frustrations. I was angry. I was angry that I didn't know more Latina women when I was younger. I felt myself constantly frustrated with not having access to more Latina women. It was hard to find their stories, and I was usually doing it all on my own, searching through journals while working on other projects. I would have never come across someone like Moraga or Anzaldúa on my own, and especially not at a young age. I figured that I couldn't be the only young Latina experiencing this. But young Latinas should have access to these women. I want to make sure that young Latinas do know these women, and know that having these conversations are important. That is why I made them my target audience. I want them to know these women, and I want them to be able to find them. I want to take some time to talk about the scope of this project. First time, I would have loved to research more women, and I would have loved to include more difficult conversations, but I simply didn't have the time for that. I also want to acknowledge my biases. I grew up in a Mexican household. I am a first-generation American in a city that is largely Hispanic. So I came in with my own biases towards the US and even towards other Latin cultures. I also want to acknowledge my own knowledge. I came into this project knowing the women that I loved, the women that I idolized, the poetry I loved, the music I loved, and I knew that it would creep into this project. With all of that being said, out of this came this website that explains a little bit about why we idolize women, but also just talked about difficult conversations and spotlighted different Latina women. I spotlighted Frida Kahlo, Selena, J-Lo, Sherry Moraga, Gloria Anzaldúa, and Ariana Brown. I use these women as vehicles to have difficult conversations. Through Frida Kahlo, I highlighted how we can feel disillusioned by our role models sometimes. Kahlo was the first role model I found all on my own. I fell in love with her beauty, her beautiful dresses, and her bold face. I then came across her activism, and I fell in love even more. But God, did I hate Diego. And I did not think that young women should ever be taking abuse from their partners in any way. I hated how love-struck she was, and I knew that when I came to be in a relationship, I would do the opposite of her. It is important to know that we do not have to agree with everything that our role models enforce. Through Selena, I highlighted how sometimes we can limit our own role models. She was beautiful and had an amazing voice, but this was not all. She fought for her dreams, and it was not easy. Her father didn't think she could run a boutique, but she did, and she did it all on her own. You see, it's important to go against our family sometimes. J-Lo, she gets a lot of hate for portraying whiteness, but she's an advocate for self-love. Her big booty wasn't always loved here in the US, but in her culture there were women with guitar bodies. So that's what she was, a woman with a guitar body. Our bodies are the vehicles for our culture, and we should learn to love them. Moraga, she writes about colorism. Being told to look whiter by our parents is harmful, and it is okay to push back. I didn't know this until I read Moraga. After I read her, I knew that it was okay to push back against those weird nicknames or the comments about how brown my skin gets in the summer. I included her to empower women to own the color of their skins and to set boundaries for themselves. Then there was Anzaldua. When I first read her, I thought, God, finally someone gets it. It's hard to make peace with your intersectionality, but it's important to love every part of yourself. I chose her because I hope that through her, young Latinas start to make peace with themselves, while also acknowledging that it's a really hard journey. Ariana Brown, she was really important to me because of the ties our culture has with music. We love rhythm and we like to move our bodies, but often the songs that accompany this are derogatory towards women. We all sing them and enjoy them, and I think that's okay. But I also think that it's important to acknowledge what these words perpetuate. Having these conversations will change our societies. In order to have a conversation about role models, I researched and defined some topics or some key terms for my audience. First, I defined Latinidad. 1. As any person currently living in the United States of Spanish-speaking heritage from more than 30 Caribbean or Latin American countries. 2. A person who identifies as Latina nearly always as an identity, a subjectivity that is partially complete, so that one identifies as Mexican American, Latina, or Chilean Latina, or Puerto Rican Dominican Latina. I make the argument that Latino people living in the United States share an identity that is mixed, it is half complete. This does not take away from their Latin experience, but rather explains that part of them that is forced to assimilate. It was important to define this term in my project because Latinidad can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. In addition, Latinidad is a term that can carry some negative sentiments because for a really long time it was used as a way to morph us into one, when in reality we are all far too different to ever be one. I also defined assimilation. The act of assimilating is changing who you are in order to align with the American values and ideals. Maybe you change the way you speak, or maybe you change your appearance. Some authors argue that when actresses like J-Lo perform whiteness, they lose their culture and they use their race. But isn't it important in the Latina culture to pass as white? Would we ever be accepted if we did not perform whiteness? So is J-Lo losing her Latinidad or simply adjusting to her new culture? A lot of my research then led me to transcendence, and assimilation goes hand in hand with transcendence. Transcendence is the idea that a person has to successfully cross over the American border, both literally and figuratively, through American audiences to be considered a successful role model. This may be because we as Latinos see assimilating to the US as the ultimate goal. We especially see it as one of the only ways to survive. Latinas become role models only once they have crossed over into American audiences. Selena represented hope by being the first widely celebrated female singer who was of mixed ethnicity. She exemplified the American dream. She was a role model because she showed us how to survive in the United States. I want to move on to discuss format and accessibility. Not only did the writing have to be accessible, but the format of this project had to be accessible. I did not want to write a traditional academic paper because of the young Latina women who I knew I wanted to reach. I could guess that not even half of them knew of something like JSTOR, which is where I found out about the women I knew, and only while working on other projects. So why would I write something and publish it in some journal where other white academics and a handful of brown people could reach it? I wanted to place my writing in a place that everyone could access. For me, in this moment in time, it was a website that wasn't too overwhelming, that young Latina could navigate, pick where to stop, pick where to further explore, and leave it where it was if they chose to. My writing style was also important to this. We exist in a borderland, as has been highlighted by Gloria Zaldúa. We exist in a constant state of nepantilism, an Aztec word of being torn between ways. For me, I am constantly torn between the Mexicana and the American, the academic and the tia, the amiga, the prima. And living in and rendering such contradictions and transformations calls for a new kind of writing style. That is why I wanted to write this piece in a more accessible way. There is poetry, there is music, there are stories, and there is color. I wrote this in a way that was more accessible, not just to the academics. I wrote this in a way that included our culture. I also wrote this piece in a way that felt true to me. My native languages are both English and Spanish. I need both English and Spanish to express myself. This project needed to be true to all Latina women, so I wrote it in Spanglish. It is also important to note that I wrote it in this way because Gloria Zaldúa taught me that I could. She was my biggest inspiration when I was writing this. Through my website, I spotlighted different women. Here, I would like to highlight 2 role models to showcase some of what was important to this project. One of my first role models was Selena. She was someone whom my mom idolized, and she shared her music with me. We had a purple CD case, and still do, as showcased in that middle image. We had a CD with Como la Flor on it and would constantly sing to it together. And today, we still watch her show together. Selena, as a role model to me, was someone who me and my mom shared. My mom constantly talked about her beauty, and as I got older, she started talking to me a bit more about the struggles that she went to. I think she was also one of my mom's first role models, and I don't think it was just for her beauty either. I think there was an underlying transcendence reason. My mom immigrated to the US in her 20s, and she also had to learn how to survive. For me, at first, she was my idol because she was my mom's. But as I got older, that shifted. She is now my role model because of her power and her determination. She stood up to many men, including men like the music producers and her dad, who said that she wouldn't be able to follow her dreams. I included Selena because she means a lot to me and the women in my life. She was one of my first role models. But I also included her to highlight that her beauty and her tiny waists were not the only things to idealize. Her power, brains, and determination propelled her career forward. Lastly, Selena showcases the ways our role models grow and change along with us. We take what we need when we need it, and that is okay. Next, I want to highlight Ariana Brown. Ariana Brown is a poet I came to know recently. She's an Afro-Mexicana who writes about the struggles women in particular experience in Mexican households. On my site, I spotlighted her poem, Write About the Cumbia Kings. And she writes, "When was the last time you indulged in the singular pleasure? No need for a shared nostalgia, your own will do. When you write about the Cumbia Kings, you must mention their sexist lyrics and their interpolation of a general pum pum without credit. The strange evil noise at the beginning of some of their songs that your primo thinks is based on a bullshit Chicano claim to indigeneity. Write about the reasons you haven't listened to them in forever, the questions you have, the allegiances you've built that won't let you listen carelessly or invite others to enjoy the music. This is solo work, this after-dark experiment in complicated memory. This is not about the Cumbia Kings any more than it's about your ex from Massachusetts or anything that does not love you anymore. This is about loving you more deeply, more and more often, starting now." Fun fact, the Cumbia Kings are A.B. Quintanilla's group. A.B. Quintanilla is Selena Quintanilla's brother. Ariana Brown is an example of an Afro-Mexicana who questions the values that are so deeply ingrained into our societies. The sexualization and discrimination against Latina women perpetuate hate, and they hurt the way we view ourselves and each other. I think when we are growing up, we fear standing up for ourselves. It goes without saying that it takes power and will to stand up to our elders, those people who we owe it all to, those tios who brought our families here to the United States in the first place. I spotlighted her hoping that a young Latina woman can relate. I think that almost all of us have a guilty pleasure song and we sing it. Sometimes wincing at the lyrics, but mostly moving our bodies rhythmically and enjoying it. But there is power in acknowledging it, and it will transform our societies. We have to question why men think it is okay to sing these lyrics about women. We have to call them out. And doing so will not make this culture any less ours. So through this project, my hope is that young Latinas are exposed to powerful Latina women at a younger age. I hope they cling to each other and stand in their power together to create a more accepting and encouraging Latin community. Thank you, and thank you to all of the women who helped me be here today.
Questions for Anna?
How do you plan to make your website accessible to everyone in this room and for your audience?
It will be published online once it's done, but I think in an ideal future I want to be working in education with young Latina women, and I would love to be able to incorporate it to things like lessons and everyday conversations in classrooms.
We have time for one more question for Anna. I was going to ask them months ago, you were thinking about the format of this question, we're thinking about things like street art. Can you tell us a little bit more about what made you want to do something digital?
I wanted to do something digital because it felt a lot more accessible and it felt a lot less scary. I feel like accessing something and knowing that there's nobody telling you you have to do it one way or you have to go and do this in this way, or that you're going to come across a word that you don't know. And I think also it ties a lot more to our culture. Our culture is colorful, it's loud, so having a piece of art to relate it to, or knowing that there's a pink backdrop that maybe looks like a wall in your grandmother's house helps a lot.
Thank you so much, Anna. First students working with you, and also to give you the honors board installed that go there as graduation.
If I can figure out how to do that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for supporting Anna. Thank you, Anna's mom, who is such a huge part of this project and is FaceTiming with us right now. And I just wanted to say that it's been such a pleasure working with Anna and watching her develop. And it's really been amazing to see how she shaped this project to say what she wanted to say and to speak to the audience that she wanted to. She did all the academic work. She can do the academic work. And then she was like, and I could write this paper academically. And then she said, but I'm not going to. I'm going to write it in a different way. I'm going to use academic writing, but I'm going to make it more accessible. And I feel like I really watched her develop her voice and become confident about this project, who she wanted to speak to and what she wanted to say. And I think you all got a sense of that today listening to her talk. So I'm so proud of her. Got a little choked up in the whole thing. So congratulations. Congratulations. And then the cord goes on top.
Yeah.
And then humor me, I'm going to take one picture because one of the other things, it's going to be a selfie. One of the other things I love about Anna is the community that she develops and has created here at events and everywhere, and how people just like love her a lot, and that's a skill and a